Welcome to Case Briefs with Megan. Let's make this case brief. Know that in terms of trade and commerce, that the US as a whole can decide what comes in and out of it, and even further, states can decide what go in and out of each individual state. But what happens when federal commerce laws come into conflict with state commerce laws? Now, this is something that the common law case Gibbons versus Ogden answers for us. Because we're going to be talking about constitutional law here in this video, we also need to talk about this wonderful thing called the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause is in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, and essentially it gives Congress, the U.S. Congress, the power to regulate trade between the many states, between other nations, and with the Native American tribes that have existed long before the United States. Commerce is made up of a lot of different bits, right? It's about the goods that are being traded, it's about the prices and quantity that's being traded, it's even about how you are getting those goods from one place to another place in order to be traded, and we'll see that pop up a lot in this case. We talk about the Commerce Clause, we also talk about this term called interstate commerce, which is not commerce happening inside of a state, it's commerce that's happening outside of the state, or between states even. You're part of a brand new nation called the United States of America, but the states don't exactly feel super united. They just know that they've got this big giant government kind of hanging over them, but they're also able to kind of govern themselves a little bit. With all of the state power, the states are using that power in order to create trading relationships with people both inside and outside of their state. We begin this case in New York State, where New York State grants a steamboat monopoly to Robert Livingston and Robert Fulton, who we're going to call the Robs. So New York State goes to the Robs and they say, look, for at least 20 years, we will give you the exclusive right to control all steamboat trading routes in New York State, which is like super sick for the Robs. It's not sick for other people who are trying to move their steamboats and start their own businesses. That's why it's called a monopoly. Of course, the Robs are both in a lot of legal trouble with this, but they're undercutting businesses left and right because they're saying, hey, instead of suing us, why don't we just grant you a license so that you can move your steamboat up and down our trading routes, and then you also get to make your own money. In this case, Ogden, the defendant, had been one of those people that had been trying to sue the Robs, and then he kind of just threw his hands up and said, okay, fine, I'll give you a license. I'm gonna go into partnership with my dear friend, Tom Gibbons. Got an important distinction to make here, which is that Ogden has a state license from the Robs, which means that he can do business in New York State, right? Gibbons has a federal coastal license, which means that he can operate his boats anywhere. So this distinction actually causes a huge conflict 3 years later when Ogden finds out that Gibbons, who's supposed to be able to use his steamboats in all other parts of the country, actually uses one of his steamboats in New York State. And Ogden is like, hey man, what gives? I have the license for New York and you don't. And Gibbons says, well, I have a license everywhere, so it kind of doesn't matter what you say. Ogden takes Gibbons to court and says, look, I'm the one with the license to navigate from New York State and bring my commerce and trade and everything all throughout New York State. Doesn't really matter what Gibbons has from the federal government or whatever. I am operating in New York, therefore I win. Gibbons over here is saying, look, I have a federal coastal license saying I am able to navigate my boats anywhere I want, bringing goods wherever in the U.S. Therefore, my federal license from the federal government should trump whatever he has from New York State. What this boils down to is who controls interstate navigation, not just commerce, but the actual navigation of boats in between states. Is it the states themselves, or is it the federal government under the Commerce Clause? What the Supreme Court says to Ogden is they're like, look, we have no idea what New York gave you, but whatever law that they gave you this license under is invalid because it's the U.S. Congress that actually controls interstate commerce. And navigation, or however you get commerce throughout the states, falls under interstate commerce. The Supreme Court essentially says, look, Ogden, we have more than just mere traffic with you riding up and down in your little steamboat and your little New York State license. You're actually trading goods that are being bought and sold in other states. And because navigation is so intermingled with that trade, with that commerce, the New York State law is invalid. We have to say that navigation falls under the Federal Commerce Clause. Learned anything from this case? You should never trust anyone named Robert.